So, what you think about Uganda? Uganda went and done it. Well, I mean, really and truly, it's not the first time they've done it. This has been basically their standard for quite some time now. They have just re-emphasized and reiterated their standard on the global stage, stamping it there for everyone to see, just in case anyone was having doubts about where they stood on the whole thing. And we're going to get some discussion on this because I think there are some really interesting angles to look at some of this with. And what I'm talking about right now is that Uganda has passed an anti-homosexuality bill, or anti-LGBTQIA2 plus bill, and they aren't the only African country. They're probably the first to reiterate it, but many African countries, I believe Africa may be the continent with the most countries that are anti-LGBTQ, anti-homosexual pretty openly. So they aren't the first one, they aren't the only one in Africa, but they have done it again, and they've reiterated it, especially for the international market, I think. And as I said, I think there are some really interesting points to look at here, because in the present Western world, the way we look at things is with some cultural relativism. The idea of cultural relativism, to some extent, is that each culture in and of itself internally would be morally upright, at least with its own internal logic, with its own internal sense of morality. So to look at a culture and say something is wrong, to look at a culture and say something is right, you are saying that with a cultural relativism there, you are saying that based on your culture. So based on their culture, what they're doing is right, and based on your culture, what you're doing is right. And who is to see which one of these is objectively correct? And the thing is, personally, I am more of an objectivist. I believe there are objective standards to things, but a lot of the modern zeitgeist, the modern thinking, leans towards that cultural relativism tendency. The whole idea of multiculturalism. We live in what is considered a multicultural country here in Trinidad and Tobago, and the idea of that is to some extent cultural relativism, where multiple cultures could all function together equally in the same society. And I am not sure that is totally true. But if you are a cultural relativist, then you shouldn't have a problem necessarily with what Uganda is doing, because they are standing up for their cultural standards. This is what they see as their cultural standards. Who are you to impose your cultural standards on them? Who are you to do that? So before we dive into all of this, make sure to hit that like button if you have not done that yet. If you have a comment, drop a comment. Make sure you are subscribed. We have new videos coming out pretty frequently, so make sure you're subscribed. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, so you know when the lives jump in and stuff. We have those mindful lives at night. So let's jump into this. Uganda anti-homosexuality bill, life in prison for saying you're gay. People who identify as gay in Uganda risk life in prison after Parliament passed a new bill to crack down on homosexual activities. It also includes the death penalty in certain cases. A rights activist told the BBC the debate around the bill had led to fear of more attacks on gay people. The bill is one of the toughest pieces of anti-gay legislation in Africa. Homosexual acts are already illegal in Uganda, but this bill introduces many new criminal offenses. So, that's the first thing to note. Homosexual acts, homosexuality for all intents and purposes, was already illegal in Uganda. So, what they're doing here is making it double illegal, I guess. But I don't think it's about making it double illegal. The fact that it was already illegal and yet they brought this back to Parliament again, I think it kind of gives a story on the reasoning behind this. If you're looking at why are they doing this, I think you look at the fact that they're doubling it up, it gives a signal of the reasoning. As well as making merely identifying as gay illegal for the first time, friends, family, and members of the gay community would have a duty to report individuals in same-sex relationships to the authorities. It was passed with widespread support in Uganda's parliament on Tuesday evening. That sentence says a lot. If we are believers in democracy, we believe that a country is supposed to be run based on the view of the majority of the people. Are you a believer in democracy? if you are a believer in democracy, then the majority of what the people said was that. Now, you could say that, okay, the majority cannot go against moral norms. You know, the majority cannot do things that is immoral. We cannot stand for that. Well, then, which morality do we use? We get back to the problem of cultural relativism. Okay, we must not allow the majority to break moral norms and to do things that are outside of what is good and what is right. Okay, what is good and what is right? Who decides that? Because I could assure you that them in Uganda and other African nations, because we're going to read about Kenya too, who are having a similar discussion right now, they think that what they're doing is morally right. So which morals are you using to decide this? The US morals? In the weeks before the debate, anti-homosexual sentiment was prominent in the media. An activist who wanted to remain anonymous told the BBC the bill will now go to President Yoweri Museveni, who can choose to use his veto and maintain good relations with Western donors and investors, or sign it into law. And if you know anything about Mr. Museveni, he has had several public videos out there showing that, you know, he's made it clear where he stands on this, and it's not really pro-rainbow. And many of his statements, if you listen to many of the Museveni clips, go out there and look for them if you're interested in them. You listen to many of them, and part of the problem he has is the fact that it seems like the Western world is pressuring Africa to accept this. If it is that you're leaving Africa to do what Africa believes is right in their own culture, then fine. But why is it that, and he spoke about this before, every time he's interviewed by a Western media, news media, every time he goes to some conference outside in the West, they always ask him something to do with the whole LGBTQIA rights business, and that is annoying to the man. He says that our culture, our society is the vast majority of our society does not approve of this. So why do you keep asking me about it? Why does it feel like you're pressuring me to accept this thing that we don't want to accept? And it feels like they're pressuring him, I believe, because they are pressuring him. It is what is happening. And I could understand it a bit. If you believe that something is a human right, someone has the right to do something, then you, wherever else in the world you look at it happening, you would say that, well, they shouldn't be doing it there. So, for example, if you believe that slavery is wrong and people have a human right to be free and free from bondage like that, free from forced labor like that, then anywhere in the world where there are slaves, you would be kind of interested in, you know, trying to decrease the slavery, pressuring people to get out of slavery. I could understand it from that point of view. I can. But then again, at the same time, this isn't exactly the same thing as slavery. This has to do with people's right to do what they want with their own bodies, not necessarily their right to be free. And in most countries around the world, probably in every single country in the world, the government, the state, the general societal authority does exercise power over what people do even with their own bodies. That's how humanity has always run. Cultures exercise power over their own society. Do they have the right to do that even if you think it's wrong? The bill's backers say they are trying to protect children, but Ms. Bayarugaba said whether you're heterosexual or homosexual, the government and parliament should introduce laws or at least implement existing laws that protect all children, boys, girls, from defilement. So the issue of recruitment has been unproven. It is baseless. It is biased. I find it interesting that this article, as I read it, though this article is written totally from an anti-bill perspective for the most part. Pretty much all the comments they quoted here were from people who disagreed with the bill. Now, I could understand you have your lean, but if you're trying to put an authentic news article out there, at least put some of the arguments where they were talking about what they were doing to protect the children. Explain why they thought that they needed to protect the children. You're just saying that someone who was against the bill said that children are to be protected in all cases, and I agree, but why is it they think that they need this bill to protect the children? Let's get into it. What does the bill say? The final version has yet to be officially published, but elements discussed in Parliament include a person who is convicted of grooming or trafficking children for purposes of engaging them in homosexual activities faces life in prison. This has to do with adults grooming children, okay. Individuals or institutions which support or fund LGBT rights activities or organizations or publish, broadcast, and distribute pro-gay media material and literature also face prosecution and imprisonment. So, the first point had to do with grooming children, influencing children. The second point had to do with the media and publishing things where you could influence people. Media groups, the third one, media groups, journalists, and publishers face prosecution and imprisonment for publishing, broadcasting, distribution of any content that advocates for gay rights or promotes homosexuality. Again, media groups promoting, trying to influence. Fourth, death penalty for what is described as aggravated homosexuality, that is sexual abuse of a child, a person with disability, or vulnerable people, or in cases where a victim of homosexual assault is infected with a lifelong illness like HIV, I suppose. That one is one of the more unique ones there that doesn't have to do with influence directly, but I mean, I'm not sure many people would argue about that. The last point here, property owners also face risk of being jailed if their premises are used as a brothel for homosexual acts or any other sexual minorities' rights activities. So you can't perform those acts in building. Okay. Interesting. And it's not just Uganda has been doing some of this. This crackdown isn't only a Ugandan phenomenon. I saw that Kenya also has some of this going on. Why are Kenya and Uganda cracking down on LGBTQ rights? This is an article from Al Jazeera. A new law passed in Uganda appears to be the first to outlaw merely identifying as LGBTQ, a rights group says. Kenya and Uganda are moving to further curtail the rights of LGBTQ people whose relationships are already deemed illegal in the conservative East African nations. And we already know what's going on in Uganda. In Kenya, a February ruling by the Supreme Court upheld verdicts by lower courts stating that the government could not lawfully refuse to register an organization calling itself the National Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission. So, a gay commission, a gay organization, a lesbian and gay rights organization was being registered in Kenya, and the government refused to allow them to be registered, but they took it to court, and the Supreme Court in Kenya ruled that actually they could register. But President William Ruto and many religious leaders and political pundits have been condemning the court's conclusion. I am a God-fearing man, and whatever happened at the court, even if we respect the court, our culture, values, Christianity, and Islam cannot allow women to marry each other or men to marry fellow men. Local media outlet Citizen TV reports Ruto as saying, supporters in both nations say the lifestyle of LGBTQ community threatens traditional values. And as we go down a little further, why is this happening? In a speech, the president in Uganda said Western countries should stop wasting the time of humanity by trying to impose these practices on other people. Under his rule, journalists have been attacked, lawyers jailed, election monitors prosecuted, the internet shut down, and opposition leaders muzzled. The increasing visibility and assertiveness of sexual minorities have also been attributed to the West. Meanwhile, conspiracy theories accusing shadowy international forces of promoting homosexuality are gaining traction on social media. In Kenya, Archbishop Jackson Olsapit of the Anglican Church speculated that the alleged spread of homosexuality was a sinister ploy by environmentalists to depopulate the globe in an effort to address climate change. Now, listen. That's a conspiracy theory, granted. But each facet of that conspiracy theory is individually true. The environmentalists do believe that the world is too populated, overpopulated, and they would like to depopulate the world because of climate change. Individually, those facets are correct. Now, to link that directly to the promotion of LGBTQ rights I don't have that information, I'll say. Meanwhile, during a parliamentary session, MP Joshua Kimilu condemned the court decision as violating the law and warned that Kenyan culture can be ruined by the West. So, I think we're getting a clearer picture here. What Uganda and Kenya, and by extension some of those other African countries, seem to be kicking against isn't just homosexuality in and of itself, because that was already illegal in those countries. They're not kicking against that in and of itself. It seems to be that they're having a problem with what seems to be like the West pushing more of the LGBTQ rights on them. Is that accurate? Is that a legitimate fear? Is that something to fear? As the Kenyan MP said, is it legitimate to fear that what the West is doing can destroy those African cultures? Well, I noticed a very interesting poll recently, looking at the polling data and the statistics and etc. etc. A poll that was comparing the presence of LGBTQ identifying people in each varying generation as time progressed through the years. Now, obviously, I think this would be in the United States, but I think that's a prime reason to look at this. This example is from the United States. The number of LGBTQ identifying adults is soaring. Americans who self-identified as LGBTQ in 2021 by generation. Let's go from the old traditionalists. So those are the people born before 1946. 0.8%. The baby boomers, they're born 1946 to 1964. That's like my parents' kind of generation generally. 2.6%. Gen X, that's 1965 to 1980, that age group. I thought it was a little more into the 1980s than that personally, but okay. 4.2% of Gen X. Millennials, us, we people, 1981 to 1996, 10.5%. And then we reach to Gen Z, 1997 to 2003. 20.8%. Now, if we're looking at the trend from Gen X to millennials, that's bigger than a double jump. From millennials to Gen Z is close to about a double jump. They're doubling by generation now. So the Gen Z, what's the next generation? Gen Y, whatever it is, they may be 40%, or maybe let's say 38%, somewhere there, judging from the increase. Why is that happening? Is this natural and authentic? Let's look at this realistically. Is it that authentically, if you don't pressure people in your society, naturally 20% of humans have alternative sexualities? Is that accurate? Do you think so? Because I teach biology. If you're interested in lessons, link up with Mindful Education over there on Instagram, Mindful with 2Ls_education. Go follow us over there on Instagram. But yes, biology is I like biology. Biology is good stuff. I enjoy genetics. If 20% of a sexually reproducing population, if any of you have done biology, you might know where I'm going already. If 20% of a sexually reproducing population has an alternative sexuality that does not naturally reproduce, would that population survive? If you're saying this 20% is natural, it's natural, this is born this way, natural, and very likely by the next generation it may increase. So if it's 38% is natural, let's even put it smaller, 35%. That's natural. 35% of a natural population choose, not by default of physical ability, choose to engage in activities that make them naturally, by and large, incapable of reproducing. Humanity would have died out in Africa. If that was the case, humanity would have died out. Right after the first couple humans were there, we'd have died out. We would not have reproduced enough. You know how many people had to keep pumping babies just to keep humanity pushing on through the ages? You think we could have afforded for 20% of the people born naturally to naturally have that proclivity? Do you think it's natural, really and truly? Or do you think that there is a cultural something, a cultural force that is encouraging and pushing more people in a certain direction? That's what, if I'm to look at the assumptions here, the assumptions here is that it's either that we actually have a very large population of people who naturally have proclivities that render them basically sterile, because naturally they don't reproduce. Now, we could say in modern times that we have modern conveniences and technology that can cause reproduction. Yes, correct. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about humanity as a species. Naturally, do we have an upwards of 20% and upwards of 30% natural occurrence of a proclivity that makes you not reproduce? Or is that something cultural, societal, that is influencing each progressing generation to identify themselves with these new norms, with these alternative lifestyles? This isn't necessarily a knock on the lifestyle, saying it's bad, saying it's good. I'm not even commenting on that. I'm commenting on the reality of the increase of it. Is it natural, or is it socially influenced? And if it's socially influenced, are the Kenyans and the Ugandans right to have some concern about the influence that the LGBTQI rights lobby may be having in their country and on their continent? That's my thoughts. That's my thoughts on these articles and this story. You tell me your thoughts. That's all I have for now. I hope you're educated, informed, or entertained, and I will see you in the next video.